Imagine the world. Not our world of cities and roads, a world of ice. A vast cold landscape stretches to the horizon. The air is thin and sharp, the wind bites, and on this landscape, two incredible creatures exist. One is a giant, the woolly mammoth, a walking mountain of fur and muscle, armed with colossal curving tusks. The other is a hunter, not a modern human, but a Neanderthal, shorter than us, broader, immensely strong. A being perfectly sculpted by the cold. The question is, how did this hunter, armed with just wood and stone, take down that giant? It's one of the most incredible stories of survival. It wasn't about brute force alone. It was about intelligence, planning, and unbelievable courage. It was about family. First, let's get rid of the cartoon image. Neanderthals were not dumb brutes. They weren't grunting cavemen dragging clubs. Their brains were as large as ours, sometimes even larger. This capacity for thought was their greatest weapon. They understood their world in a way we can barely imagine. They knew the seasons, the behavior of animals, the properties of stone and wood. They could think, plan, and communicate complex ideas. Without this, hunting a mammoth would be impossible. A suicide mission. They were also physically formidable. A Neanderthal skeleton tells a story of power. Their bones were thicker than ours. Their joints were larger. Their muscle attachment points show they were packed with dense, powerful muscle. They were built for explosive, close-range strength. Their stocky build with short limbs and a wide torso was an adaptation to the cold. It conserved heat, but it also gave them a low center of gravity. They were stable, powerful, and built for a physical struggle. This build wasn't for long-distance running, it was for wrestling with the world up close. Their society was the other key. They lived in small, tight-knit family groups. Maybe 15 to 30 individuals. Everyone knew each other. Everyone depended on each other. This wasn't a solitary pursuit. Hunting a mammoth was a group project. It required perfect coordination, trust, and a shared understanding of the goal. The group was the unit of survival. A lone Neanderthal was vulnerable. A Neanderthal group was a force of nature. Now let's look at their tools. The star of the show was the spear, but not the kind of spear you might picture. Neanderthals did not have spear throwers, the atlatl, which came later with modern humans. They didn't have bows and arrows. Their spears were heavy. They were made from thick, sturdy shafts of wood, likely yew or ash. And at the tip was a masterpiece of stone technology, a Mousterian point. This point was made using a special method called the Levallois technique. It was a sign of their advanced thinking. Instead of just chipping away at a rock until it looked sharp, they would prepare a core of flint. They'd shape it carefully, almost like a sculptor. Then, with a single, perfectly placed strike, they would knock off a flake that was the exact size and shape they wanted. The point was pre-designed in their minds before it even existed. These points were sharp, symmetrical, and strong. They would be attached to the wooden shaft using bitumen, a natural tar, and wrapped with animal sinew. This created a robust, deadly weapon. But because of its weight and the lack of throwing technology, it was a thrusting spear. You couldn't stand back and throw it from a safe distance. You had to get close. It's dangerously close. So we have the hunters, intelligent, immensely strong, working in a coordinated group, and armed with heavy thrusting spears. Now for the target, the woolly mammoth. Let's appreciate the scale of this animal. A large male could stand over 11 feet tall at the shoulder and weigh more than 6 tons. That's bigger than most African elephants today. It was covered in a thick, shaggy coat of hair to protect it from the brutal cold. Underneath that was a layer of fine wool, and under that a thick layer of fat. This made it a walking fortress. Its hide was incredibly tough, and then there were the tusks. These weren't just for show, they were formidable weapons. A sweep of that massive head could send a hunter flying. The tusks were also tools for the mammoth, used to sweep away snow to find vegetation. The mammoth's sheer size was a defense. Its weight could crush a hunter instantly. A stamp-eating mammoth was an unstoppable force. Mammoths, like modern elephants, were likely social animals. They probably lived in family groups led by a matriarch. These herds offered protection. The adults would form a defensive circle around the young if threatened. Attacking a healthy adult mammoth in the middle of its herd was unthinkable. The hunters would be trampled, the risk was too high, but mammoths had weaknesses. Their eyesight probably wasn't great. Like elephants, they likely relied more on smell and hearing. They were huge, but that size also meant they weren't as agile as a deer or a horse. They couldn't turn on a dime, and like any animal, they were vulnerable if they were sick, old, or injured. An individual separated from the herd was a possible target. A juvenile, not yet at its full size and strength, was a possible target. An old bull, past its prime and living a more solitary life, was a possible target. This is where the Neanderthal brain came into play. They didn't just see a wall of mammoths in charge. And they observed, they tracked, they waited. The hunt didn't begin with a roar, it began with a quiet, careful decision. The decision to hunt a mammoth was a big one. It wasn't something you did every day. Smaller game like deer, horses, and bison were the staples of their diet, but a mammoth was a prize unlike any other. The payoff for a successful hunt was enormous. One mammoth could feed a group for weeks, even months. The meat was rich in protein and fat, essential for survival in the cold. The fat could be rendered for fuel. The massive bones could be used as tools or even as structural supports for shelters. The hide could be used to make tents, clothing, blankets. The ivory of the tusk could be shaped into tools or other objects. A single kill provided a massive amount of resources. It was worth the incredible risk, but only if the plan was perfect. So how did the hunt unfold? It was a process, a series of stages. First came the tracking and selection. A hunting party, probably made up of the strongest adults in the group, would set out. They would scan the horizon, looking for signs. They'd read the landscape. Mammoth tracks are hard to miss. They'd find dung, signs of feeding. They would follow a herd, but not to attack it directly. They were watching, they were assessing, they were looking for the right one. They needed to find an animal that was at a disadvantage. Maybe it was a young one that strayed too far from its mother. Maybe it was an old male whose movements were slow and labored. Maybe it was one with a slight limp and old injury. Patience was everything. This could take days. Once they selected their target, the next phase began: separation. They had to get the chosen mammoth alone. This required a deep understanding of the environment. They would use the landscape to their advantage. They might try to spook the herd using fire or loud noises, hoping to panic the animals and cause their target to break away in confusion. A more likely strategy was to wait for a natural opportunity. Perhaps the mammoth went to a waterhole alone. Or maybe the group could maneuver it toward a natural trap. This is a key point. The old idea of Neanderthals digging giant pit traps is probably a myth. Digging a hole big enough to trap a 6-ton animal with sharpened sticks and stone tools would be a monumental undertaking. It's not impossible, but it's inefficient. It was far more likely they used traps that nature already provided. What kind of traps? A narrow ravine or a box canyon where the mammoth couldn't turn around easily. A muddy area or a bog near a river where its feet would sink, immobilizing it. A steep, slippery riverbank that it would struggle to climb. The goal was to put the mammoth in a position where its greatest assets, its size and power, became liabilities. They were turning the mammoth's strength against it. Now for the attack. The moment of truth. The mammoth is cornered. It's confused, angry, and terrified. The Neanderthals close in. Imagine the scene. The air is filled with the mammoth's trumpeting calls. The ground trembles. The hunters are a whirlwind of controlled chaos. There is no single hero. This is teamwork at its most primal. They wouldn't just run straight at it from the front. That's where the tusks and the trunk were. They would use distraction. Some hunters might make noise, wave their arms, or throw rocks from one side. This would draw the mammoth's attention. While it was focused on this perceived threat, other hunters would move in from the sides and the rear. They had to be fast, agile, and fearless. This is where the thrusting spears came in. They had to get within arm's length of this terrified, struggling giant. They would dart in, thrust the spear with all their might, and then retreat before the mammoth could turn on them. The goal wasn't a single, clean kill shot. The mammoth's hide was too thick, its ribcage too dense. It was a death by 1,000 cuts. They were aiming for specific spots. The underbelly, where the hide was softer and vital organs were less protected. The legs, especially the joints. A deep wound to a leg muscle or a tendon could cripple the animal, making it unable to charge or flee. It was a brutal, bloody, and exhausting process. The hunters would work in waves. One would attack, then another, never giving the mammoth a moment to rest or focus on a single threat. They were using their numbers and their intelligence to overwhelm an animal that was vastly more powerful. The fight could have gone on for a long time. It was a battle of attrition. The Neanderthals were trying to cause massive blood loss and to exhaust the animal until it collapsed. The evidence for this kind of hunting is written on Neanderthal bones. Many Neanderthal skeletons show a high rate of injury. Not just broken fingers and toes, but serious trauma. Healed fractures to the skull, the arms, the ribs, the legs. One famous individual, Shanidar 1, had a crushed eye socket, a withered arm, and severe leg injuries, yet he lived to an old age. This pattern of injury is very specific. Scientists compared it to the injury patterns of modern professionals. It didn't match most athletes, but it was a near perfect match for one group professional rodeo riders. These are people who regularly deal with large, powerful, and angry animals up close. The injuries on Neanderthal skeletons are the silent testimony to the incredible risks they took. They were getting thrown, kicked, and trampled. They were living the hunt. So the mammoth is finally down. It breathes its last. The hunt is over, right? Wrong. In many ways, the real work was just beginning. Now, the entire group would get involved. The successful hunters might send a signal back to their camp. The rest of the group, smart women, children, the elderly, would come to the kill site. This was a community event. A 6-ton mammoth is a mountain of resources, but you can't just pick it up and carry it home. They would likely set up a temporary camp right there by the carcass. Butchering a mammoth with stone tools is an immense task. It requires skill, strength, and the right tools. They wouldn't use their precious spear points for this. They would use a different set of tools: stone flakes, hand axes, cleavers. Sharp flint flakes were used like knives to slice through the thick hide and carve away the meat. Heavier stone tools, like hand axes, were used to chop through tendons and dismember the limbs. They would break open the massive bones to get at the rich, nutritious marrow inside. This process would take days, nothing would be wasted. The prime cuts of meat would be eaten immediately, a great feast after the danger and exhaustion of the hunt. Large amounts of meat would be cut into strips and possibly dried or smoked for preservation, providing a food supply for the lean times ahead. The thick hide would be carefully removed and scraped clean. It was a huge source of leather for clothing, blankets, and shelter. The bones, once stripped of meat and marrow, were not discarded. Large bones could be used as anvils for breaking other things. Some might have been used in the construction of simple shelters. They could even be burned as fuel. In a landscape where trees might be scarce, mammoth bone burns long and hot. The sinews were used as cordage for tying tools. Even the stomach contents, partially digested plant matter, might have been a source of nutrients. The kill site would become a hub of activity for a week or more. It was a temporary factory processing this incredible bounty. It was a place of celebration and security. For a while, the constant gnawing threat of starvation was gone. The group was safe. They had won. How do we know all of this? We can't go back in time and watch. But we can read the evidence left behind in the dirt. Archaeologists have found sites that are essentially fossilized scenes of these events. In some places, they find a cluster of mammoth bones, and scattered among those bones are Neanderthal stone tools. This is the first clue. The hunters and the hunted together in the same place. But it gets more specific. Scientists examine the mammoth bones under a microscope. They can see fine linear scratches on the surface of the bone. These are cut marks. They match the marks made when a stone tool is used to slice meat off a bone. They show us exactly how the animal was butchered. We can see where they dismembered the limbs, where they filleted the large muscles. Sometimes they find even more dramatic evidence. A mammoth vertebra with a stone spear point still embedded in it. A rib bone with a V-shaped fracture that could only have been caused by the powerful impact of a spear thrust. This is the smoking gun. It's direct proof of a violent encounter. Then there is the chemical evidence hidden within the Neanderthal bones themselves. By analyzing the chemical isotopes in the bone collagen, scientists can reconstruct a person's diet. The results for Neanderthals are clear. They were top-level carnivores. Their diet was heavily dominated by meat, specifically the meat of large herbivores. They weren't just scavenging leftovers, they were actively hunting and consuming huge animals like mammoths, woolly rhinos, and giant bison. So, when we put it all together, a clear picture emerges. Hunting a woolly mammoth was not a simple act. It was the final exam of Neanderthal life. It required everything they had: their intelligence to plan, to choose a target, to use the landscape, their technological skill to create effective weapons, their physical power and courage to get close and make the kill, and most importantly, their social bonds, the trust and coordination that allowed a small group of hunters to face down a giant. It was a testament to their mastery of a harsh and unforgiving world. They didn't just survive in the Ice Age, they thrived. They stood at the top of the food chain, the image of a Neanderthal family working together around a fallen mammoth, with the cold wind howling around them, is a powerful one. It's a story of ingenuity, of community, and of a deep connection to the natural world. They were not a failed experiment in human evolution. They were, for a very long time, the undisputed masters of their world. And their ability to hunt the largest land animals on the planet is perhaps the greatest proof of that.